Spring 2023. Edward Aguilar is a college freshman standing at a sports arena in Illinois, trying to buy his girlfriend a hockey jersey. There is no waiter, no barista, no table, just a cashier handing him a pre-packaged piece of polyester pulled from a cardboard box under the counter. The cashier spins the iPad around. The default tip option starts at $20. Not 20%, 20 actual dollars. Behind him, a line of impatient fans, all staring at his screen. The cashier stares too. The screen glows. He taps the button. He pays. Later, he tells a reporter, "Of course, I tipped because of social pressure. It's a social tax." Here's the thing nobody told Edward. He wasn't just tipping a stranger. He was feeding a payment processing machine designed, line by line, to milk that exact moment of hesitation. Because every time you tap that 20% button, two companies, Square and Toast, quietly skim a bigger cut of your transaction. Not metaphorically, mathematically. And the screen you're staring at? It wasn't designed by your barista. It was designed by behavioral scientists in San Francisco and Boston, who never met you, never met the cashier, and never had to stand in that line. The story starts in 2009. Jack Dorsey's friend Jim McKelvey loses a $2,000 sale of hand-blown glass faucets because he can't process a credit card. They found Square. The pitch: democratize payments for the little guy. A flat 2.75% per swipe. No contracts, no banks, no fine print. In 2010, they shipped that famous tiny white reader that plugs into an iPhone headphone jack. A plastic square the size of a postage stamp. It rewires American commerce. In May 2011, Square Register launches. The cash drawer disappears. In its place, a swiveling iPad pointed at the customer. The terminal now faces you. That matters. That same year, 3 MIT grads, Steve Fredette, Aman Narang, and Jonathan Grimm, found Toast in Boston. Their target: every restaurant in America. By May 2012, they shipped their first Android-based POS, hunting the legacy giants Micros and Aloha. Now zoom in on November 20th, 2013. This is the day the modern tip is born. Square pushes a redesign called Smart Tipping. Transactions under $10 get default buttons. $1, $2, $3. Transactions over $10, 15%, 20%, 25%. 3 weeks later, on December 12th, Fast Company publishes a piece titled "How Square Register's UI Guilts You into Leaving Tips." Merchants report that tips doubled overnight, not over a quarter, not over a year, overnight. Gerald Knight, the lead designer of that interface, told reporters the buttons were really key. It's so much easier than typing in all those numbers. He called manual tipping a usability problem. He said the new flow made leaving a tip very easy and frictionless. Friction. Remember that word. In Silicon Valley, friction is the enemy. And the friction Square eliminated was your ability to say no without being watched. In July 2014, economists Karim Haggag and Paci publish Default Tips in the American Economic Journal. They analyze 13 million New York City taxi rides. Their finding: default buttons act as massive psychological anchors. Whatever number is pre-selected becomes the gravity well your brain falls into. But push the defaults too high, and customers rebel. They tip zero out of spite. Economists call this the rebellion threshold. It's the same instinct Edward fought down at that arena and lost. Then comes March 2020. Sit-down dining collapses. Takeout explodes. Customers, terrified for essential workers, start tipping at counters where they never tipped before. The pandemic did something the software alone could never have done. It morally laundered the prompt. Tipping a cashier became an act of solidarity. The screens were waiting. September 22nd, 2021. Toast goes public at a $20 billion valuation, processing over $50 billion in annualized volume. That December, Square renames itself Block. The payments empire is officially built. Now, how does it actually skim? When you tap a card, your money doesn't go straight to the merchant. It runs through a 4-layer pipeline. You, the merchant, the processor, Square or Toast, the card networks, Visa, MasterCard, and the issuing bank, Chase, Citi. The card issuing bank takes the biggest cut. That's called the interchange fee, anywhere from 1.5% to 3.3%. It pays for fraud risk, rewards points, the cash back in your wallet. The networks take an assessment fee, about 0.13%. And on top, the processor's own markup. Square's standard in-person rate, 2.6% plus 10 cents per transaction. Toast's, 2.49% plus 15 cents. And here's the mechanic that drives everything. The fee is calculated on the total gross charge, item, tax, and, critically, tip. Square's own merchant documentation says it plainly. Payment processing fees are taken out of the total amount of each transaction, including tax and tip. A $5 latte, no tip. Square's fee, 13 cents on the transaction plus the 10-cent flat. 23 $0.03 total. The merchant keeps $4.77. Now the customer taps the default 20% button. $1 tip. Total charge, $6. The fee climbs to 26 cents. That's an extra 2.6 cents the processor collects, generated entirely by the tip. Sounds tiny. Now multiply it by every coffee, every burrito, every haircut, every food truck taco, every drive-through smoothie, every airport pretzel in America, every single day. This creates a structural conflict of interest. The processor is hired by the merchant, but the processor's revenue is tied to gross transaction size. The bigger your bill, the bigger their cut. So the screen, the interface itself, is engineered to maximize that number. High percentage defaults. The no tip button buried behind extra taps, sometimes grayed out, sometimes hidden entirely behind a smaller, harder to read link. In May 2024, Harvard law scholar William McCann publishes a paper naming this exactly what it is. He calls them dark patterns. Interfaces, McCann writes, that prey on several cognitive biases using social pressure and default settings. His sharpest line: while POS companies make higher returns from an employer when higher tips are given, POS companies and employers are limited in how much of the tip they may take. Translation: the system has a ceiling, and it pushes against that ceiling every single transaction. By November 2023, Pew Research finds 72% of American adults say tipping is now expected in more places than it was 5 years ago. A Bankrate survey shows 66% of Americans feel confused or pressured by counter-service touchscreens. And one Michigan study found that digital prompts increase the share of customers who tip by 38% versus traditional methods. A 38% lift, engineered with 3 colored buttons. Now, the legal trick that lets this whole system stand. Under the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, signed by Roosevelt on June 25th of that year, employers can't keep your tips. But in 1942, in Williams versus Jacksonville Terminal Co., the Supreme Court ruled employers could count tips toward minimum wage. That ruling cracked the door open. A 1966 amendment kicked it wide. The tip credit was born. Employers can pay tipped workers as little as $2.13 an hour federally, frozen at that number for decades, as long as tips fill the gap. And there's a regulatory carve-out hidden in the Department of Labor's Field Operations Handbook, Section 30D05. The employer is legally allowed to deduct the actual processing fee from the worker's tip. A dollar tip becomes 97.4 cents to the server. The processor never absorbs a penny. Toast actually automates this. Inside their dashboard, there's a feature called Optimize Tip Withholding. It's a default setting, the default. Their own documentation says it lets a manager reclaim a percentage of employee credit card tips/gratuities to cover the cost of credit card processing fees. You can enter a percentage, up to 3 digits, the manual reads, that will be reclaimed from your employees' card tips. 5 states have banned this: California, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and, as of August 1st, 2024, under Minnesota's SF 3852, Minnesota. In California, under Labor Code Section 351, the employee gets 100% of the digital tip. The merchant eats the processing fee, which means in those 5 states, every time a customer tips on a card, the merchant actively loses money. A $10 tip costs the restaurant about 25 cents that they will never recover. But the processor always wins. They get their percentage of the tip regardless of which state you're in, which worker gets paid, or who eats the fee. Let's talk scale. In 2025, Toast processed $195 billion in gross payment volume across roughly 164,000 active restaurant locations. 82% of Toast's $6 billion revenue comes not from software, but from payment processing fees. The software is the lure, the fees are the business. Based on Toast's own published tipping data, we can estimate roughly $19.5 billion of that volume was digital tips. At 2.49%, Toast and its card network partners captured an estimated $485 million in fees on tips alone. Block, meanwhile, processed about $250 billion in Square volume globally. Estimated tip flow through Square, around $12.5 billion. Estimated fees skimmed from those tips, roughly $325 million. Together, more than $800 million a year, flowing to payment processors purely because you felt awkward at a counter. In October 2022, Toast's Kelly Eston, SVP and GM of Enterprise, publicly celebrated that diner tips were 9.9% higher year over year. To Toast, that wasn't a social anxiety statistic. It was a quarterly win. May 7th, 2026. Toast reports its first quarter results. Gross payment volume surges 22% year over year to $51.3 billion. Active locations, 171,000. The system isn't subtle anymore. In June 2023, Toast quietly added a 99-cent fee to all online orders of $10 or more. bypassing restaurants to bill customers directly. The backlash was nuclear. On July 19th, Toast's then CEO Chris Comparato retracted the fee, but the appetite to monetize you directly never went away. In February 2026, Block announces a 40% workforce cut, from 10,000 employees down to under 6,000, to optimize margins. The company projects Square's annual volume will hit $275 to $300 billion by 2027. Leaner, hungrier, same skim. By Q1 2025, the average full-service tip stabilized at 19.4%. Quick service, 15.8%, on transactions where, 20 years ago, no one tipped at all. Notice what's happened to the social contract here. Tipping used to come after the service. Now it comes before. Before your latte, before your jersey, before the worker has done anything at all. You're not rewarding service. You're paying insurance against a cold meal, a slow build, a judgmental glance. And that anxiety has enabled a massive structural transfer. Wages that used to come from employers now come from you, directly, out of your pocket. Tracked, processed, skimmed. POS sales reps actively pitch this. The smart tipping screen, they tell business owners, will boost worker pay without raising base wages. A perfect self-reinforcing loop. Low wages, tip-dependent workers, guilty customers, inflated bills, and a processor sitting in the middle, skimming. Cornell's Dr. Michael Lin, who's published over 80 academic papers on tipping, found something brutal in his analysis. Digital prompts raise tip volumes. They do not raise customer satisfaction. They do not increase repeat business. The tip isn't gratitude, it's pressure, converted to revenue. But the system is cracking. Behavioral economists call it psychological reactance. When manipulation gets too aggressive, people reassert control. They tap no tip, out of spite, out of exhaustion, out of the dawning recognition that the screen is not their friend. This isn't even a new fight. In 1916, William Scott published The Itching Palm, calling tipping un-American and democracy-destroying. 6 states, Iowa, Nebraska, Tennessee, South Carolina, Illinois, Washington, passed anti-tipping laws within 2 years. State Supreme Courts struck them all down. The practice survived. It always does. Because someone, somewhere, is making the rent off your discomfort. Now state legislatures are circling again. More tipped wage bans are coming. More tip withholding prohibitions. The pendulum is moving, slowly. But none of that helps Edward Aguilar at the arena. None of it helps you when the screen spins around and a stranger waits. Because the screen is the gatekeeper now. And the gatekeeper, very politely, very efficiently, is collecting a toll on your discomfort, one tap at a time.